Okay, welcome back. Great to see you. Now, I want you to indulge me a little bit just by promising that between now and about 1:45, you will still keep your head in the sort of cosmic place rather than the tyranny of feeling that you need to engage with what's in your phone. So, I know what you're going to say. Well, I'm looking at biblical texts on my phone and all that stuff. Great. So I'm going to invite a panel of fellow pilgrims to join me here. First of all, Mark is going to come and join me so that we welcome Mark back. And I also want to invite Adrian, David and Dave to join me on the panel as well. So, don't be shy. And Ali, yes. In the chair that needs to be taken from the end of my row. And Ali. We have 2 microphones. And we're going to do a little bit of Q&A with you, a la question time. And I might stand up because I might feel the urge to stand up at some point. So that's okay. So what we're going to do is we're just going to do a quick intro of our august panel here. If you just say who you are and what you do and where you do it, that would be great. Starting, Dave, with you.
Okay, my name's Dave Tubby. I'm the minister of Northfield Baptist Church.
Where's that?
That is in South Birmingham, so it's about half an hour's drive away from here.
Great.
Hi, I'm Ali. I'm part of the Fresh Streams leadership team, and I'm one of the ministers at Rising Brook in Stafford, which should be about an hour away. It wasn't this morning. It was more like an hour and 3/4 this morning.
Yeah.
But, you know, there we go.
Thank you. Adrian Agar, one of the regional ministers here in Heber. I live up the road at Stourbridge. I have to think now where I live.
I'm Dave Gregory. I'm Senior Minister of Cross Green Baptist Church, which is near Watford on the edge of London. And this year I'm President of the Baptist Union with the theme of Divine Windows, which is an exploration of science and spirituality.
Ooh.
I'm Mark and you met me.
Great. So we've got a couple of questions that I'm going to get us going on, and then it's over to you. Can I just say, you are allowed to be provocative. Okay, this is a safe space, and you're allowed to think aloud, because nobody wants a sort of sanitised, boring next half an hour before lunch. So we're allowed a little bit of fire, and if we cross a line, I'll just take a quick time out. So here's the first thing I'd like us to talk about. This whole thing about, you explained to us this cosmic grand picture, and quite a few of us are stuck in the sort of nitty-gritty of everyday real people. So have we over-individualized matters of faith? Let's start, Mark, with you. Are we running a risk here in our efforts to be constantly nice to people of over-individualizing matters of faith?
Well, it seems to me that the gospel has very important things to say that are deeply personal, but I'm not sure they're individual, and there's a difference between those two things. So I love what Paul says in Galatians 2:20, I'm crucified with Christ. And the Son of God loved me and gave himself for me. And that's the Apostle Paul saying that when Jesus is hanging on the cross, it's not just for the world in general, but it's for him, the Apostle Paul. And the gospel is deeply personal. One of the things I think that evangelicalism has discovered over the last 30 or 40 years, I think it's a direct consequence of the charismatic movement, is much more emphasis on the church, where there was much less sense of the value of church, much more individual Christianity. And I think discovering that corporate dimension is enormously healthy for Christian life. In the end, we need each other on the road of discipleship, because it's almost impossible to walk on our own in the face of pressures from the world. So rediscovering church. It's not that church hasn't been important. Those of you who are Baptists, the idea of covenanting together to be churches has always been historically really important. But it's a rediscovery as the church tended to edge towards individualism. The church is important. I'm just trying to give another dimension to that in what we're looking at today and say there's a kind of historical, cosmic, bigger dimension of where we're going. I drove in the car here using sat-nav from my son's house in Nottingham. There's one thing navigating by sat-nav. You know, it kind of gets you there, but only really tells you the next road. I love opening the road map and saying, you know, we're here, we're going to get to here, and that's roughly the route we're going on. And then the sat-nav makes sense. And I meet younger people who've never read a map in their lives. They just switch their phone on, put the sat-nav on, and they only really know where the next road is. And when you're lost, you're completely lost. And that's what I think I'm trying to do, give people a sense of the map.
So, Adrian, are we in danger of propagating sat-nav spirituality in our churches?
That's an interesting question. Yeah, well, maybe yes and no. I did get, in my first church, goes back many years, I was up at Leyland Baptist Church, and I hadn't been there that long, but had a member who came to me and said, I'm not sure I want to be part of a church where the gospel's not preached. And what he actually meant was where...
for you?
Well, absolutely, yeah. What he meant was John 3:16 and that individual personalisation constant. And actually we were looking at many of the bigger pictures, the impact, partly personally, but partly as a church and our place within society, within the community and everything. So there is a danger with some. I'm encouraged by what I see, that people are seeing God is much bigger than that as well.
And, okay, Dave, you're president of the Baptist Union, so that means that you perhaps get a little bit, or will get a little bit of a view on Baptist churches. How do you gauge this whole thing between a healthy understanding of the cosmic sweep versus I want something from God that can just see me through till tomorrow? What's going on?
Well, I've only been at this job about a month.
So plenty of time there then.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, I've visited a few churches in that month. In Oxford, I was in Leicester on Sunday night. Actually went back to the church that was a part of my return to faith journey, where I connected back with Christianity and church when I was at university. When, you know, I'd left actually because my view of the cosmos suggested there wasn't a God. But I came back to faith through that church. I'm finding actually people are, people want to encounter God when they come together in worship. But I'm actually seeing churches and people involved in a much more wider range of activities and life, and seeing that within the purposes of God in all of those churches that I've been involved in. Yeah, you know, the church in Oxford has planted 2 churches in the last 5 years, but, you know, they've also tried to start a free school up on a new housing estate and are engaged with their community. A lot of scientists in that church. So, you know, we did they've got a science club going on a Saturday afternoon, which is what, you know, I joined in with. We do simple science experiments, a bit like the Message Church to Science stuff that I'm involved with. And actually every person who was involved in that was a scientist. And actually to have a church saying to them, actually what you do in your life and what you're interested in, passionate about, is actually valuable for the church. I think that was really special. That was really important. Okay. I think in terms of this personalised, you know, do we personalise the gospel too much? I have the scars of preaching on creation care and being told not to waste my time, because preaching the gospel is much more important. But also I think we need that bigger picture, but we need people to take a personal interest in it. We need to help people to understand how their wider life, their gifts, their interests, their passions, how does that fit within the bigger purposes of God, not just the church program. And I think that we need an individualistic approach to the
Okay.
gospel, in a sense, within that bigger purposes of God.
Okay, well, let me change tack a little bit then. You use that phrase creation care. So if all things are being made new, that means that we're not going to get a new planet. We need to therefore look after this one. We sing that awful line, don't we, in Amazing Grace? The earth will soon dissolve like snow, which I can never find myself wanting to sing, actually, in the middle of such a great song. What do we need to be thinking about then when it comes to looking after our planet? And is that part of the mix? What for the future of the planet, Dave?
Good question. I think the here and now and the understanding of our planet naturally has a part to play in what the hope that the resurrection and the ascension and everything Mark was talking about enables us to impact. Really, I think we have an obligation, a responsibility to look after our planet, and those of us who have responsibility to preach. And the privilege that is to do that, it is an opportunity to encourage people to reflect on the here and now in a way that does impact positively onto eternity as well. But I think the here and now is beyond just the creation care as well, in that for Joe Bloggs, who is suffering, so the guy that I saw yesterday in our congregation who's probably only got a month left to live because he's suffering with terminal cancer, he's not thinking about the here and now and the earth here. He's thinking about what part he could play in that, but he's naturally looking at the future beyond the here and now. So whilst we have a responsibility to consider, and we should ensure that we look after the earth that we have, we also have responsibility to point people towards the hope that lies beyond what is here now.
Yeah.
I think the two go arm in arm. I think one doesn't negate the other, but I think the two complement each other.
But it's fair to say, isn't it, that particularly young people have great concern for what we're doing to the planet, just on that subject. I mean, I'm interested to know, for instance, because we did have your group, I think, had some youth and family practitioners. Was that a subject that you ventured to talk about? Did you talk about the fact that Christians, we take a microphone out, if Christians should actually be engaging, and a lot of our young people are passionate about green issues, aren't they? Is that a fair comment?
It is a fair comment. I don't think we touched on it. Did we? No, I don't think we did touch on it.
So out there and amongst the younger generation, there is a huge interest in this planet, which, is it fair to say, has the church waking up to that, or are we still under, the paradigm of the earth will soon dissolve like snow? Are we actually waking up to the notion that in the full purposes of God, God has got plans for this planet, the non-human aspect of it, just as well as the human aspect of it? And does that really matter? Anybody like to pick up on that for a minute? And I'll come to Ali in a tick. Anybody want to pick up on that? Yeah.
Yeah, so I did physical geography at university, lots looking at that climate and the effects on the planet and kind of our impacts and just kind of environmental change. So I think I definitely agree with that. Lots of people are very concerned about the planet, and I was definitely encouraged by the kind of seminar this morning that I think the gospel means both, obviously, like you're saying, arm in arm, and I think the church that I was in at university was aware of that, and I think lots of people are waking up. I think there's an organisation called Arosha, which is really, really looking at kind of God's heart for the planet as well as for people as well, and looking at the work that that's doing. So I would say, yeah,
Okay.
kind of young people are
you going to say something? You got a microphone?
I was just going to come on to off that as well. I don't think it's just necessarily about environment. I think our teenagers and 20s, it's about injustice as well. There's a huge hunger for injustice, anti-corruption in places of power across the world, care for the refugees, equality. There's a huge hunger to see that sort of transformation happen in the world. Not necessarily seeing that, they're not necessarily seeing that as a God thing, but there is a huge hunger amongst that generation to see that happen, which gives us a way in to talk the big message.
So has the evangelical wing of the church recovered its evangelical social conscience? Yes or no? On a sliding scale of 0 to 10, 0 being we're still in the dark ages, and 10 being we're at the cutting edge of this movement of justice and liberation and creation care. Where would your church sit between 0 and 10? Who would be in the sort of 2s and 3s? 4s, 5s? 6s? 7s? 8s? 9s? Great. And if we've been around long enough to remember 20 years ago, do we award ourselves a higher mark now than we did then? Because the way we managed to survive is, or I've managed to survive, is at least recognising progress. So that's good. Anything else on creation, Kurt? Mark, you were loitering there.
I'm loitering because I have some anxieties about this, that the church, in order to find relevance and to gain moral authority, is prepared to chase the world's agendas. And to say it's popular amongst young people, I don't care. The question is, does it flow from the gospel? And that's really key for me. And what I'm interested in is distinctive Christian voices who are speaking into those things rather than being corralled into what are essentially secular agendas. Because the world doesn't have any eschatology, it needs to find ultimate value in pursuing certain, what I would regard as intermediate ends. That's not to put down creation care or justice issues, but I'm listening out for distinctive Christian voices who have things to say about this that flow from the gospel rather than buying in agendas from the world. And just to give a parallel, if you go back and read 1 Corinthians 15 and think about what Paul says about the body, he's talking about looking forward to the resurrection of the body. Paul's perspective on that from texts like 1 Corinthians 6 and 1 Corinthians 15 is that the body has ultimate value because it's going to be revived by God in the last day. And therefore we value our bodies, but we don't value our bodies in the same way as the world values our bodies. If you look at the media, how does the world value bodies? It values bodies for their beauty. We try and keep them alive as long as possible. We try and keep them healthy as long as possible. And the gospel perspective is that our bodies are there for holiness, to please the Lord. And Paul can even say, look, I put myself in danger for the gospel because this body and this life is not the only one I'm ever going to have. And therefore, although I'm investing for the future, it has a gospel perspective. And Paul is more concerned, to put it simply, about the holiness of the body than he has about the health or longevity of the body. And I'm looking for those kind of gospel perspectives speaking into the areas of justice or into the area of creation care. And I think the gospel has something to say to those things, but I'm just worried about being sucked into essentially secular agendas.
Yeah, David.
I take a bit of a different perspective on that. It seems to me, in my experience of being a Christian, that the only reason we are now talking about creation care is that we were woken up by a secular agenda. I used to work at the Met Office, used to work in the Centre for Climate Change and Climate Studies. And working through there through the 90s, I could not figure out why most of the church were not interested in this issue, why we did not see this as a missional issue. It's really encouraging how the mission agencies like BMS, Christian Aid, other major agencies, along with Rocha, who particularly focus on this, have woken up because they saw in the end the issue of climate change wasn't just about the things we were doing to the world, it was actually what the things we were doing to people in some of the poorest countries. It became a justice issue, and that's how we woke up to that. We started reading the Bible differently and interpreting it and seeing new things in it because we were receiving information from a secular agenda. One of the biggest impacts in my church and in my community of churches about the environment is David Attenborough and his one episode on plastics in the ocean. Now, for the last 5 years, we have given away plastic water in plastic bottles to a one-day music festival we have, and it's gone down really well. And now this year, the churches, the leaders of the other churches, saying we can't give away plastic bottles anymore. My treasurer has gone and replaced our usual plastic communion cups with ones made out of corn oil plastic, which you can throw in the compost bin because of David Attenborough. We have been woken up by this secular agenda, and I don't think there is a biblical mandate for it, and that's why we've been able to run with it. There's one slight hesitation I have about linking creation care to eschatology. And I've done a lot of teaching on creation care, and I have used this motif of new creation as a motivation. The problem for me is, as a scientist, is which planet are we trying to care for? Now, the way we experience it now, or the way it's been in the past, because about 15,000 years ago, you would have been under a large ice sheet. The planet it's not about conserving the planet. It's about working with God's purposes for the planet. The planet changes naturally. We're just pushing it to change unnaturally. So I think we have to be a bit careful about how we use some of this eschatological imagery in the Bible as a motivation for our environmental concern. There are other texts we could use. There are other things like incarnation, about valuing nature, which would allow us to do that. There's a discussion there.
Well, you finished in the place there of looking at some of the key texts. Did any of you, in any of your groups, look at the Romans 8 passage or the Revelation passage? Did any of you tackle any of that? Not that we did, and we had a group of ministers. But did any of you got any questions around any of the passage sort of reflections on it? Yeah, Rob. Let's take a microphone back to Rob.
Yeah, one of the things that struck us in our group was your reference to the 1,000 years. And some of us, at least, are still confused about that, really. Partly because none of us could ever remember any teaching or preaching in our churches on it. So could you just expand a little bit on what your understanding of that is?
I thought you were the preachers and teachers in your churches.
And at what...
So whose fault's that?
At what point, the new heaven and the new earth will come in?
Well, I just think the narrative sequence through the book of Revelation is fairly clear, and it's different to Romans. That's really my main point. And I think it has a deliberate intention of conveying the idea of a Sabbath rest for the earth. And there's a long tradition in Christian theology and in Jewish theology. Abraham Heschel's book on the Sabbath is, from a Jewish perspective, is wonderful. We Jews have not built cathedrals. We've built cathedrals in time for the worship of God. We stop and rest every Saturday from dusk to dusk, and that, wonderful. And I think it's saying what the Jubilee is saying, that the land of Israel was to have a rest, and this idea is that for 1,000 years, I don't think it's a literal 1,000 years. I think it just means a long period of time. The big numbers, the big thousands in the book of Revelation means a big number, essentially. But it's saying there will be rest for the earth, that what God intended, which was that the earth should rest, God will do that for the world. And we're to build that into our lives. I think the lesson of Sabbath is not we should not read the Sunday newspaper or watch television on a Sunday, which is what I was brought up with in my Baptist household. but it is that rest is holy. Rest is holy because God rests from his labours, and that's a kind of universal principle. So I think that's what's basically going on with the 1,000 years. But you've got the return of Christ. As I said, there are two resurrections here, one before the 1,000 years and one after, and that's what makes this text unique. I'm not necessarily saying you should read this in this way in terms of a doctrine, but I do think that's the narrative of the book of Revelation, and I think it's the underlying motive for that unusual feature. And of course, it's being massively mixed up with dispensationalism, particularly in brethren circles, in Pentecostal circles, in America. You get people saying there are three returns of Christ: the rapture, then when Jesus comes back, and of course when he came in his incarnation. And I think that's just got pre-millennialism, which takes that narrative through Revelation 19, 20, 21 and 22 just as fairly literal. It's just got it a bad name theologically, and I think disentangling it from that, going back to the church fathers and saying they tried to take this text quite seriously in different ways because they saw the value of God giving rest to the earth. And the great theme of reversal, the oppressed, the marginalized, the downtrodden, the martyred, they have life, glory, restoration. And for a church that's suffering, that's a powerful message. And I think that's the message of the millennium. I'm not so interested in a timetable. I'm more interested in its deeper theological meaning. Some people will want to say that's what we should believe as the way things will pan out. Others want to say, no, it's not. I want to say, let's hear the key theme of Sabbath, of restoration, of reversal.
Let's just come to some of the other questions and things that you reflected on in your groups that we've not covered so far. So we've talked a little bit about the planet. We've talked a little bit about over-individualizing faith. What else did, just coming to group leaders, what else did you talk about in your groups that particularly animated you? Anybody just want to give us a little bit of feedback, and Amy will go around with her microphone. Ruth.
So we had some discussion about the sort of, we've got to think this stuff through. I haven't thought about this. I'm coming from a brethren background. Haven't thought this through enough to Revelation, like compared to Revelation itself, and how comfortable we are with people encountering God and having truth revealed to them, where those spaces are. And the best teaching I ever heard on this, Ali, you did at Fresh Streams a few years ago. So I wondered if you could kind of, thinking Christian-y, sometimes hear people going, oh, I'm a theological thinker, as if like, because I'm working with people for whom it is, they've got the least stability or and want it to be for the most vulnerable and the least able person, that this is still the gospel and it's still true. And we've had a lot of long words, which I like, but I'm kind of looking at what do you think where it might be about revelation? So Sylvester from Tanzania, who's with us, was talking about no literacy at all going on there. So what's the basics of the gospel, and how do revelation and the thinking?
So how do we reform our message, incorporating this grand sweet picture? Is that
sort of, but the actual, like, how comfortable are we that God might reveal some of this himself without us having to think it through really carefully and teach it properly because we're the experts?
Okay, Ali, you've got a microphone in your hand.
Thanks. I have no idea how to answer that. I think we talked about this a little bit, or I raised it a little bit in our group. Doesn't, for anybody, their journey of faith and of understanding the revelation of the big picture have to start with personal revelation of how much Father God loves them and how much there is personal transformation. And then once they have that, then there is a possibility to understand hope and transformation of in the mega picture, in the cosmic picture. But I think it has to start with personal. And certainly my experience with people in our church or who have come in and found Jesus, it's always going to start with the personal. the personal journey as part of a community of faith that means transformation is possible, that then enables them to go on a journey to then understand, wow, I'm part of something that God is doing eternally in the cosmic picture. That's massive. I mean, I was saying we don't use the word cosmic, but we would use the word big. You know, God is bigger than this. God is bigger than we can ever imagine. God is bigger than we can ever understand. There is a bigger eternal journey and message going on that we are part of. And it is when you're sitting with someone who has found Jesus, has found transformation, and then hits something very hard in their lives, as you were saying, sitting with someone this week. And it's in those moments when actually, yes, there is the concept of, but we're living with the now and not yet. And there is the whole concept of a new heaven and a new earth and no tears. And sometimes we always have to hold all of these things in tension. And sometimes that is where you're leaning to, because life for that person is so horrific that ultimately their hope is found beyond this life.
Okay,
But it's
I'm just going to
everything together,
pick you
isn't
up
it?
on kingdom now but not yet.
Yeah.
And just throw in the idea that, are we believing God for too much? Are we expecting too much of the future kingdom in the now, or are we believing God for too little? Is our eschatology under-realised or over-realised? And perhaps you can pass the microphone on to Adrian to answer that question. Yeah. Are we believing God for too much?
I don't think so. I think we're probably believing God for too little.
Okay.
I tend to find that people tend to be quite limited in their thinking and an expectation as to what God can do. If you look at the world picture, and then you go to South America, you go to Asia, you go to Africa, they tend to have a far bigger view of God, an expectation of God doing things and involvement within somebody's life. If I can just go on to say, I think one of the crucial questions, and I ask, trying to break it down a little bit, is what does a healthy church look like? So for pastors, for each one of us in our church, that we can get hold of God touching somebody individually, but actually we have an involvement with God in something much bigger. So I tend to ask churches, what is God doing within your community? You know, God's already at work. How can you join in with what God is doing? You can't be involved in everything, but you should be involved in something, is what I say, and something beyond and outside your four walls. And as a regional minister, that's one of the things that I feel that we have, is that something of a prophetic into churches' lives, is actually saying, go beyond. And there are too many that are only looking at their own four walls, and actually God's doing so much more. And we are seeing across the West Midlands a number of our churches that are seeing some accelerated growth, and some exciting things are happening.
Yeah.
And all of them, I would say, yes, they have a great belief in God changing people's lives. They will call people to faith, but they're very incarnational. They're all involved within their communities in a whole variety of different ways.
Okay, Dave, are we believing God for too much or for too little?
No, I think I would echo what Adrian has said, really. I think I don't believe that it is fair to set parameters on what God is capable of doing. And actually, if you do that, you limit God into the box that you want to restrict him into. I think if you have to take a bold step and say, well, let's just remove the box and see where God takes us. And I think that does begin with a personal kind of connection. I agree with what Ali was saying, everything what Ali was saying in terms of God breaking into that individual's life, being the kind of the kickstart really into something that is bigger and wider. And if we restrict that to our own understanding of what we believe that God is capable of, we have restricted God. And I don't believe that is a fair thing for us to do, because we are only affecting ourselves in a detrimental way if we do that. I think that kind of personal connection, which then leads into something which is wider and greater, is absolutely what Jesus was talking about and how we lived and acted out the gospel, and what we have, that hope, which is for the now, but also for the what is to come.
Okay. Okay. I mean, I've been in churches where within that church there has been what I would describe as very strong charismatic thinkers who've been influenced by certain movements across the world that have believed God for certain things. And we're going to touch on this afternoon, I think. And I'm not by nature a cynic, but even that stretched my thinking. So my concern is that I want to believe God for more, but I want to somehow retain my critical faculties in so doing. So that, I guess we're in that balance. We're going to take a last question in just a minute, but Mark looks like he wants to say something.
Well, just I think with the Wimber thing, and there's the emphasis on already and not yet, that is a deliberate antidote to raging cynicism on the one hand, or a kind of post-millennialism which thinks that everything's always going to get better and better and better. It's saying there is always an already and there's always a not yet. And just in response to your question, we have a congregation about 20 or 30 on a Monday night of very poor, very drug addicts, people are ex-convicts who are very poorly educated, they can't basically read. I went to a humanist funeral of a young lad kicked out of the house by his father at 18, died of a drug overdose in a council flat on the other side of town. The humanist funeral had nothing to say other than he had a good life and his family loved him, and every single person there knew that was a complete lie. Because it just was not true. And a few weeks later, I had to do the funeral of a young disabled guy who'd had an epileptic fit in the bath, drowned, just complete tragedy. But he'd been baptized, he had a very simple faith in Jesus. And again, the family had a humanist funeral, and afterwards we had a memorial service in a little Salvation Army chapel, and I could say some of these things. And there's nothing more spine-tingling than saying at a Christian funeral, in sure and certain hope of the resurrection to eternal life. That says everything. And you do not have to be sophisticated, complicated, need long words to say hope beyond the suffering and death, the injustice of this world, is held out in the gospel. And people get it. And the big picture stuff, they don't understand all the theological details and the niceties, but they get the idea that what I'm doing is valuable in the eyes of God, and I'm contributing to a bigger purpose. And people are passionate about that, and it motivates them. I don't think that's a matter of education. These people can't even read, but it is a question of getting the gospel deep down. And it's my job to make sure that in those crucial moments, not that I'm preaching to them, but I'm saying to them pastorally, you know, we suffer in this world. God does amazing things, but we suffer in this world, and Christians die, but God's got it. It's okay. And they get that, and it's so exciting.
So on the subject of Christian hope, I like to finish in a hopeful place. In our culture at the moment, there's all sorts of fears, although we're a bit less fearful now that our friend from North Korea and Donald Trump have shaken hands with each other, or maybe we're not. One of my observations on all that's happened with Brexit is that there's quite a lot of fear out there. So what opportunity for the Christian church as a community of faith that actually lives out hope? We are a people of hope. God's got it. How do we do that? What does that look like for us in our churches? Maybe Adrian, you can kick us off on that. How do we live out this notion of being a hopeful people based on truth?
Last night I went to one of our churches that was starting a community project called the Hope Project. And they were particularly looking at the community around about them, so a number of young people that are struggling to do with schooling and behaviour and they want to actually bring self-worth and everything into their lives. It's the gospel that's pushing them to do it, and they're going to do that through music. They've also got another project to do with domestic abuse, and particularly with women, and bringing healing and restoration. And actually, there is something more beyond where you are. And there was a third project as well to do with depression and low self-esteem. And they were wanting to say, actually, there's more to this life than where you are. And actually, part of the answer is Jesus is the answer. Now, they're looking at bringing a whole host of different skills to it. But Jesus is the one that brings that change.
Okay, a couple more comments, but any of you got any thoughts or ideas about how we can communicate this message of hope to the people that we work with? Anybody like to share any of their own particular stories or thoughts on that?
Mark, can I share something of
Yeah,
what we've done?
Dave and then
Sorry.
Ruth, yeah.
So in Northfield, one of the things that we've sought to do is just be practical and simple in terms of how we respond and how we share the message of hope that Jesus is. And we've set up a community hub which is there to offer similar in terms of what Adrian was saying, really, just very practical, straightforward demonstration of the gospel. Being Jesus and sharing Jesus appears in very different ways and will appear in very different ways in all of our church contexts. It's about understanding where our community is at and then trying to respond to that in a way that is led by the Holy Spirit and which shares with them the love of Jesus that we've shown and or that we've known on a personal level. And that will look different, but practical and simple, rather than big, large, complicated things. Is what will inspire people to understand what the gospel means for them, I think. And we've seen some fantastic stuff going on.
Yeah, great. That's great.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut in.
That's fine, it's fine. Ruth?
In the area of mental and emotional well-being in this nation, I'm so excited about the local church. I got to tell you, little, big, don't care what it is, there's something very, very hopeful and beautiful about an honest group of people of any age saying, I don't really know what the answers are, but let's together work out what it looks like to be human and inclusive and have the big story of God on the outside. Oh, it's so exciting, and it's everywhere. And I can't tell you how many churches I'm walking and God's already doing this. And it's not an individual personal thing, it's a community. It's where the church is coming into the conversation about national well-being at its very best. And it is a community thing. And it isn't, there's the community. And like earlier on, I was like bristling at the whole, it's a secular thing. I don't know what that means anymore. I don't know if there's any such thing as that's a secular agenda. This is God's agenda. And he's using any old body. And he's using people who aren't part of the church and people who are and people of peace all over the place. So I'm really hopeful about what mental ill health is like as a gift to this nation and the church to help us to work out what the gospel looks like in practice. So.
Great. I think we're done on time. Maybe just finish with a little teeny-weeny story from my days in Newcastle. Our constituency MP at the time was Government Chief Whip, Nick Brown, in the last Brown government. In fact, I think he's the Chief Whip in Corbyn's group now. But anyway, that's another story. He used to do the occasional surgery in the church, and I can remember one day just chatting with him, and it was the time of the expenses scandal. That was a glorious period for government, wasn't it? And he said, we've realised that the churches in the UK are the best hope for the nation. I thought that was fascinating. This is from a man who has struggled personally because of his sexuality with certainly the evangelical side of the church, and he wanted to say that he was so grateful. Please, Mark, he said, can you let people in your church and other churches that you know that we are so grateful for the mouths that are fed, for the hope that is brought, for the advice that's given, for the homes that are open. And so he went on. So whilst we're aware of our failings and our faults, we are a people of hope, aren't we? We are a people who can bring transformation, partly at least because we make our small contribution in the context of this big picture of hope. Anyway, I shall resist the temptation not to preach. You can, then we're going to do lunch. You can have the last word.
This is, I like what Eugene Peterson says, actually. He said this in a book on creation care, but it's about pastoral ministry. He said, every time I sit in somebody's kitchen around their table because somebody has died or they've lost a job or there's a mental health crisis or there's some other crisis in their life, I'm working out the conditions of Genesis chapter 1. I've stepped into the mess and I'm listening and part of the creativity of God through the Spirit, who's saying, whispering, let there be light. We did a wedding on Saturday, great community event, lots of people from the community there. At the reception, after all the speeches, after all the presents had been given to everybody out, the family, the mother, her new husband, and her son got on the stage, and she said, we've got one final present for somebody who's always been there for us through thick and thin, and that's for John. Now, John is my colleague. He's a youth and children's minister. And they gave him a T-shirt. It's a Star Wars T-shirt. It's theologically dodgy because he has a picture of Darth Vader on, and it says, I believe in the Lord. Not quite sure if that's about Darth Vader or John. But, you know, I think back to our John's journey with that family, and at tough times for that lad, he used to go around with his big box of Lego, and they'd pour it on the floor, and for a couple of hours they'd make Lego models, and he'd listen and he'd talk. That's hope.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Great story to finish with. We're going to go off for some lunch, which I'm sure you'll be delighted by. Well done.